All right, we're live. Hello, everybody, and welcome to our second iBiology and NRMN Google Hangout. Today, we are going to have an amazing panel answering your questions about negotiating an academic position. So I'm going to introduce our three wonderful panelists. First up, we have Dr. Omar Quintero, who is an assistant professor of biology at the University of Richmond in Virginia, where he combines research and undergraduate education. His lab studies the genes and proteins involved in cellular motility. It's taken him a few tries to find an institution that fits his research and teaching goals. So he's had some experience and practice in this negotiating an academic position thing. He's been faculty at Franklin and Marshall College, then at Mount Holyoke College, and then at the Penn State College of Medicine. We also have with us Dr. Raychelle Burks. She is an analytical chemist that combines classic chemistry and mobile devices for forensic research. After a few years working in a, working in a crime lab, she returned to academia first as a teaching adjunct and later as a research postdoc at Doane College in Nebraska. And she has just accepted a tenure track position at St. Edward's University in Austin, Texas. And she is beginning her position there very, very soon. And last but not least, we have Dr. Kassandra Ori-Mckenney. She is an assistant professor at the University of California, Davis, where her lab studies the regulation of the cytoskeleton during neuronal development and maintenance. Both Cassie and her husband were on the job market last year. And by her own admission, it was a crazy season. They had a lot of joint interviews and brought out their 2-year-old daughter on 8 trips around the country. She was also pregnant during the entire interview season, so she'll be able to share some interesting perspectives from that experience. So welcome, Cassie, Omar, and Ray. It's great to have you here for this discussion. So I don't want to waste any time, and I want to jump in. I'll start with a few prepared questions, but I want everybody who is watching, please send your questions and your thoughts, and you can send them through the Google Hangout platform. You can also send them on social media using the iBio Hangout hashtag. So let's jump in. Interviewing for a faculty position can be really stressful. Sometimes it could be a long process. So after you get that offer or multiple offers for a faculty position, why do you need to negotiate? Why not just say, you got an academic job that's very difficult to do. Why not just say yes and negotiate instead? Whoever wants to go first, not all at once, please.
I could start. One of the things that I think is maybe not obvious in trying to land an academic position is that a school may have a sense that you fit what the opening was, but they may not have a sense of what resources you might require to actually be successful at the job that they want you to do. And they may have an okay sense, but your needs are going to be unique from sort of the general needs for that position. So in the negotiation process, I looked at it as doing the best that I could to try to set up the position so that it was most likely that I could be successful doing what I needed to do.
Yes, I second that. So you get so excited that you get an offer and you think, oh, my dreams are coming true, my career in academia is happening, but you need to prepare for your own success. You need to make sure that you can keep this job, and in order to ensure that, you need to make sure that you negotiate for realities of your research, which we can get into.
I think it's especially with certain populations. There's been a lot of research on women negotiating in all types of jobs and people of color. Sometimes the notion is, you know, I should just take this offer, right? Whatever offer they give you, and I think part of it is the other side. If you want to, the person making the offer is they have their goal, right, and they have their starting point, and so part of it too is okay, I see your starting point, and here's what I'm thinking. But you know, I think the fear comes in where people are just like, I should just take whatever they throw at me, without, you know, really having a discussion. Is that needs to go away, and I think sometimes that's what people are told is you should just be grateful you got an offer. Don't rock the boat. They might take that away from you. And it's not just salary, it's also, like my colleagues are saying, it's also facilities, lab space, monetary startup money, credit hours. I mean, I always wanted to, you know, when I decided to go into academia, you know, going principally undergraduate institutions, so how many credit hours you're carrying from one term to another, what are their ideas for summer requirements, all of these types of things need to be put on the table, as well as, you know, if the goal is tenure, not just to do good work and good teaching, but, you know, you hope that maybe 10 years in your future, is our tenure metrics up for discussion as far as how you're going to be, you know, how your work and how your scholastic input is going to be considered to move you forward in that process. Everything needs to be clearly outlined and discussed so that everybody, when you agree to this thing, it's a binding agreement between everybody involved. And so that means that they think that they're getting a certain, you know, package, and you think you're getting a certain package. And only when you get into it and get into the nitty-gritty can everyone be on the same page. I think unfortunate occurrences, which I think we all have a few stories that we've been terrified about or heard or been scared about, is, you know, how many of those was that, you know, there wasn't a good reading of the fine print, if you want to use another cliche. So all of that needs to come out, and sometimes it comes out in the interview, right? Like some of these things, but some things don't come out until you start negotiating and you realize, oh, we're going to need to have some, where can we come out on this? And so, because once again, once you sign, that's it. In a way, that's what you've agreed to. And so that's why I think it's important that everybody's on the same page so that you're moving towards the same goal. I hope, you know, that they want you to be as successful as you want yourself to be, right? Because they've closed their search and they've hired you. So it behooves everyone that the process is, you know, moves in a certain way.
Yeah, that's actually a really good point that you mentioned about pretty much fine print and getting everything in writing, because sometimes during an interview or a second interview, people will tell you, you know, oh, and you'll have access to this, and of course you'll have this, but if you don't actually have that in writing, when it comes to that point, we were like, wait a minute, I thought that I was supposed to have access to this, and they were like, oh, well, was it in your letter? You know, so those many aspects are very important to have in writing.
So I want to ask a really, really naive question, because I have not been through the process of applying for an academic position. I've never negotiated an academic position. When does the negotiation process start? Like, do you have an offer on the table, but you haven't accepted? And related to that question, can you be negotiating multiple offers at once?
Yes. You can definitely be negotiating multiple offers at once. And that's also a way to protect you in case one potentially falls through. And just to understand what various places can potentially offer you. But I think that in my experience, I didn't start negotiating until after there was already an offer letter. So after there was something in writing to me that was given to me, and then that started the process.
The process started for me with a phone call from the Dean of Arts and Sciences saying, we'd like to extend an offer before we write the letter. Let's make sure that we are all on the same page about startup and how many courses you're teaching and what your space will be. So the official offer didn't come until after the negotiations were done.
Oh, interesting.
Which may be a difference in, you know, being at a primarily undergraduate institution versus being at an R1. We also, I guess my timeline was pretty short. So I got an offer and I had about a week and a half to go from offer to signing.
I had a lot less, only because the circumstances around mine was they knew certain things were in the works in certain other places, and they were, you know, different people were like, we know that, like, you know, there's a certain part of the year where everyone knows they're actually trying to push offers through fast. It could be a week, could be two, could be less than a week, because they know that if a person, you know, certain times of the year there's a rhythm almost to academic hiring, and they know that if you've got lots of other interviews that it's all going to be, you know, it could potentially be a race, quote unquote. But I think that there's a difference between, there's like the soft negotiation, and I only, you know, use this terminology where, you know, you're on the on-campus interview and you start floating, you know, certain things that, you know, you want to get it out of the way, so that if this is not the place for you, or you're not the right candidate for them, you don't wait until, at least in my mind, until you're already gotten an offer and then maybe even signed, or like, you know, that stage of the negotiation process. Some of these things that you might be asking for, as far as, you know, startup scale, maybe not a hard number, but, you know, how many zeros are we talking, like that kind of stuff, or like what kind of teaching load do you want to carry, or, you know, those types of questions. What are you going to be doing during the summer, which at some institutions is different than others. You can get a real feel for how things are going to go during the on-campus interview. I think for myself that, like, nitty-gritty brass tacks negotiations was the same as Omar, is when you get that call from the dean and they start throwing numbers at you, and then you have to be prepared to start throwing numbers right back. But luckily that, you know, they kind of set up a phone call, or you get an email saying, let's set up a phone call. So the time between that is maybe the time you can do research, if you haven't already done it, to kind of find out, okay, where am I at, where should I come in, so that if I hear certain things, I can know where on the scale, you know, certain things are falling. And I think at this point it is a good idea to say that there's no one strategy based on institution. I think we've got represented here R01 and PUI. They can have very different goals. They can have very different metrics, and the negotiation processes can look very, very different. And that's not only based on institution, it's also based on department, on the cost. So, but definitely I would think that I've seen different processes just by type of institution, sometimes the levels that are involved. I don't know what your guys' experiences have been.
So we have a question from the audience, from Lindsay Long, that I think relates to what we just talked about, you know, about when do you start the negotiation conversation. And what Lindsay is asking is, how do you start the conversation, or the negotiation conversation, without sounding like a jerk? I think this is a common concern that people have, that, you know your value, you know what you want and what you need to be successful and to establish your research and your teaching, but also, you know, there has to be a balance. And so how do you navigate the negotiation? What are some strategies for effective negotiation?
One of the things that I found useful, I guess salary usually comes up as an early question, is looking through things like the data on the Chronicle for Higher Education for some sense of what salaries might be like at your institution, keeping in mind that sometimes those numbers are weird for whatever reason. So at the University of Richmond, where I am now, we have a business school. And the business school data distorts the salaries for everybody else if you look at Chronicle. So I looked at Chronicle, I thought, oh wow, this is like way more than I've ever seen anywhere else. And then in talking to the dean said, yeah, we know that the Chronicle data is distorted because of what we have to do to keep business faculty and law faculty. So looking for data elsewhere, I found that in all the times that I did this, the departments were really welcoming to somebody who had just gotten an offer, and they shared the startup lists of recently hired faculty so you could see what sorts of things other people had asked for. So getting data first, and then trying to get a sense from the dean of what's negotiable and what isn't, and then being creative with what is negotiable and kind of ignoring what isn't.
Yeah, so before I got my offer letter, I drafted up a budget in Excel for essentially what the optimal startup funds would be. So this included all of the equipment that I would need to be successful. It included essentially 3 years of support for a technician and a graduate student, essentially 2 people, or a graduate student, a postdoc, etc. And then supplies for 3 years, something to help me generate preliminary data before I apply for my first large grant. And this was, you know, a solid number that was sent to every school. So every school had my budget, and they knew what I thought I needed to be successful. And that was after the second interview. And so I actually didn't end up negotiating my startup package in terms of money or my salary, because, well, with the UC system, it's all transparent, so you can go and see everyone's salary in the UC system. But I thought that monetarily, the departments did the best that they could, both for salary and for startup at various places. But you can negotiate other aspects of that after, you know, you receive your offer letter. But one of the first things was, okay, they had my budget. You know, they knew what I thought I needed.
I think research, like, you know, Omar is saying, and, you know, and the UC system is a prime example. If this is a public institution, that's going to be readily available as far as salary scale goes by assistant, associate, our endowed chair, you know, like all these different sources of income. If you've got a private institution, that might be a little bit trickier. You know, take the Chronicle, you know, look at the Chronicle. Is there a better way to break that up? If you can separate out, say, the influence of certain departments. Also, of course, the interesting thing to look at is gender disparity, which Chronicle data will do. You can see that in a lot of institutions, all of the women on average are getting paid less. And so, you know, how does your institution rate with that? Is it across the board? Is it by, you know, department or college? So all that kind of information, when you're on your interview, you can also hopefully get an idea of the types of startup packages, the scale at least. I mean, you know that too. You know, if you're going to a PUI, you're going to know the scale of your startup is going to be here compared, you know, if you're, like for me, St. Edward's, and then if you were to go to UT, right? Like, because the R01, PUI, right, and then the scale of the number is going to be vastly different. But then again, your you know, your whole kind of goal and the type of institution can also be fundamentally different. So I think doing your homework and knowing, you know, that if you go into say a principally undergraduate institution and you're doing work that requires a solid phase probe NMR with a full-time technician, and you're going to need, you know, 1.2 million, that may not be a good place to start from. You know, like the scale of your work, the place you're applying, you know, really doing your homework. What's their strategic plan? You know, all these places typically have one. Do they have any independent funding sources for internal, you know, funding. Sometimes they have big endowments. Some places have endowments that can support students and or faculty, which can be a way to, see, can you get a slice of that? So part of going into negotiations is just being really prepared to know what you might actually have access to, what they have to offer, what they can actually do for you. I think overshooting the mark, it can also demonstrate that you don't know where you are, which that can, but they would, I think everybody would get a flavor for that too in the phone interview and on the on-campus interview, if it's not maybe a good fit, depending on a lot of different directions, is your scope for the institution you're at.
So
one thing.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Omar.
I was going to say one thing related to this idea of getting a sense of what a starting number might be, and this I didn't do very well as a postdoc, would be to have a sense of what operating costs are for the things that you plan on doing. So how much are pipette tips? How much are different things? And keeping in mind that the institution that you're at now, so if you're going from a place like an R1 that has really strong negotiating power with vendors to a PUI that doesn't have strong negotiating power with vendors, your price point for the same item might double. I had that experience just with individually wrapped serological pipettes were twice as much in my first position as they were at UNC from the same vendor for the same article. So having a sense of how much your science costs day to day is probably a good place to start before you even get to the point of applying for jobs. Just knowing the cost of what you want to do.
Yeah, that's a really good. I never thought about that. So you've mentioned that if you're a public institution, that's public information. So look at that. Look at the Chronicle for salaries. Look at gender disparity information in terms of salaries. But if you're gonna other aspects besides your salary, if you want to find out, or you're gonna get a sense of what other people have been offered in terms of startup package, or getting funds to help them move from one place to the other, like how do you get a sense of those other items that you have to negotiate? Is it because talking to people, or how do you get that kind of information?
So I actually asked to see a lot of offer letters. There was kind of a wealth of information from my postdoc lab, and I kind of harassed a number of previous people who had started their own lab, and I was curious about their budgets and about their offer letters as well. And some shared them and some weren't comfortable with it, which is completely fine, but that does help you get a little bit of a sense of different things that you can potentially negotiate for. And also just getting advice. And subsequently, I've heard from other people who have negotiated other aspects of their offer letter, and I was like, oh, that's a great idea. I wish I had done that. For example, asking to get on core facilities for free, so asking for some time on the core facilities. That was an incredible idea, and I didn't think of it, somebody else did, and I was like, oh, I wish I had thought of that, right? So sometimes the place that you're going, like I said, they can be very generous. Like, they know what you want, and they're going to give you the max amount monetarily that they can. And sometimes, it's not within their power to make that any larger, but you can try to negotiate other things, facility time or renovations to your lab space if you think that those might be costly. The amount of time given to spend your startup, if you want to try to extend that, to 4 years or 5, see what you can do within kind of the boundaries that the department can push a little bit more.
Yeah, the sharing factor, there's some, there are just some caps. Certain budget lines are approved for salaries within a very, can be approved within a fairly narrow range. But as far as facilities goes and sharing resources and, will you have to buy all of your own reagents, or are there some that are considered, because they've negotiated bulk with a particular vendor, huge amounts you can just get from the stockroom. And it sounds like minutia, but when it comes to, you're looking at the daily, a yearly, a monthly budget, those types of core facility issues, or all these things, as far as like scholastic output. So I mean, that's always a concern, right? Paper, publish or perish. But what does that mean as far as scholastic output to the kind of institution you're at? And really getting, sometimes that can be very broad and mean paper, could mean presentation, but presentation has to be invited, like all of that kind of stuff. In some places can actually be negotiated in advance, and over, if there's an output per year, or is it averaged out over a certain time. So it's not just the startup package money, it's also facilities. It could also be funding lines, as far as, say, if you don't want to have to use your startup to pay people, is there another pot of money, say in an endowment, or if there's some type of research funding they've gotten for undergraduates or for certain target groups, will you be able to apply for that? Will your students be able to apply for it? Because that way you can eliminate personnel costs totally and focus on tightening, like that whole part is eliminated, and then you can spread the wealth in these other areas. So all of those types of things. How did I learn about that? Well, luckily, postdoc-wise and talking to friends and professional societies and going for, they have like a whole, in ACS, there's a whole professional division. Those types of minutia management questions and, the facilities things, you start doing your homework so that when before the phone interview, the first phone interview, you have all of that, a lot of that done. So you're not scrambling, during the phone call with the dean trying to Google, although you might still be. I think I was. I don't know. But a lot of the bigger issues that you've already got a good flavor for, which could even color, where you apply, right? I mean, sometimes maybe you won't apply to certain types of institutions or a certain institution because you know that they don't have any of this stuff that you need, and they won't be able to support you in various areas. But you won't know that until you've done kind of all that heavy, I think that part's the heavy lifting, all of that kind of minutia type work.
And some of this, I think you can get the institution on your side based on how you present the request. So for my current position, I knew I needed a microscope that they didn't have, and it was going to be costly. And I didn't ask for a microscope for me. I put it in terms of the success of the students working with me, the needs of the department to produce graduates that were well prepared for current approaches in biomedical research. I made the request about how they were going to be better by spending this money, not about how I needed all of this money to get to sign on the dotted line. It was about them. It wasn't about money for me.
That is really genius, especially that's really solid advice for PUI. Can you use it in the classroom? How is it going to benefit the average student to get them into the program that comes next? And definitely, I think Omar and I are both at PUIs. Our strategies and the things that we have to weave into our proposals are going to be fundamentally different than at an R01. Some things will be the same. But sometimes you got to sell it in a different way.
Yeah, that's a great strategy. So you know what value you're bringing as a faculty and with your research and the teaching, but it's not just about it's not about you. It's about them. So you have to know the institution and the way you have to frame it when you're negotiating. It has to be how is it going to benefit the institution and the students. I think that's an awesome recommendation in terms of a negotiation strategy that you can use. And that actually brings me to my next question. You've talked a little bit about some tips and strategies to negotiate, but how aggressively did you have to negotiate to get what you wanted or what you were happy with? And how long was that process? Some of you have alluded to this, but how aggressively did you negotiate, and how long did it take?
I think for the aggressiveness of negotiation, I paid attention to the tone of the dean as I was talking to her. So she sounded very excited and very enthusiastic, and when I asked about negotiation of salary, the tone and language changed. So I paid attention to when, and I knew not to push after that. And it wasn't that it was mean, it was just like, yeah, we don't negotiate salaries. Salaries for us are what they are. And I guess what I had kept in mind in the negotiation was that this was different than negotiating the price of a house or the price of a car, because in addition to getting whatever was under discussion, you were going to be working with these people for hopefully a very long time. So it wasn't that the negotiation was the end, it was the beginning of a conversation.
Yeah.
Mine was, oh, go ahead, Kassandra.
I was going to echo that yeah, you're also building relationships here, and you want to make sure that you don't ask for anything extravagant, and at the same time, yeah, you listen to the people that are making the offer to you, you know, and I found the same thing, you know, this is the best that we can do for you for a startup, this is the best that we can do for you for a salary. I didn't touch that. You know, and I trusted it, and you know, they had my budget, and it was very, very close match, and so beyond that, you know, I didn't want to rock that boat because I did trust, and now I understand kind of a little behind the scenes that it is difficult to get these pots of money, you know, and there is a lot of negotiation behind the scenes between, you know, the department chair and the dean, and you know, there's a lot of negotiations that they have to do, and you don't want to put this kind of undue burden on them either. Now, obviously, if you think that they're trying to lowball you in some way, then yeah, you know, the negotiation may be, you know, pretty important for money. But I echo what Omar says about, you know, listen to the tone and try to understand also, you know, where they're coming from. It was interesting because my husband and I were both offered, you know, similar letters, and so of course salaries were equal, you know, for male and female, and startup packages were equal, you know, across the board, and they were comparable to what I'd seen for previous people, you know, plus or minus a certain amount. But yeah, you have to understand their position as well, and you have to remember they want you, right? I mean, they made you an offer, they all sat in a room and they talked about you, and they want you, and they want to be competitive in trying to get you as well.
I think that's our tendency. I think it's very important, you know, again, another echo, you know, how you can tell, you know, what's kind of negotiable, what's not, how are they coming to you with the salary and startup package. For me, startup was no problem. Salary was more, I mean, I'm moving to a place where the cost of living is skyrocketingly high compared to where I am now. And so I had done data, you know, looking at data not just from the school and the Chronicle, but just, you know, where I'm moving to compared to where I'm moving from, you know, the cost of living differential and this number that you've quoted me. And, you know, but I knew that my kind of perception of a counteroffer was not so far off the mark where it was like, what did you just come back with? You know, it was within the line, you know, that you know, okay, well, when they got approved for this budget line, because I was actually been on a couple of search committees, they actually have a little bit of wiggle room that they've gotten approved for. You know, it could be plus or minus 2, 3, 4, 5, 10%. It really depends on the institution in the high, you know, way that they can go. And so I did ask for, you know, the dean said this is the amount that I could actually approve without getting the vice president involved, and I said, well, I'd actually, you know, if you could drop this person a line, that'd be great. I'd be interested to see. And that is a gamble, but I also said it in a way that made it clear that, you know, I am trying to look out for my best efforts. It's not that I am trying, you know, based on the cost of living, Austin being, you know, the property values they're like San Francisco levels. I mean, they're really, you know, they have all these articles coming out about that kind of thing. And so once you get locked in, that was kind of my angle, is to go that. But I also knew I was coming in far below still what would be considered like, what insane number did you just ask for? Like, so I knew it wasn't too far off, you know. But that was still the dean got back to me by the end of the day.
Wow.
And so it was very, very fast. But I also, you could, again, by not only checking the tone, but the speed of which people are getting back to you, the speed of which the process is moving tells you how far you rank in their estimation. You know how you feel about them, or you should. The unknown maybe is how they feel about you. And so part of the read is not just the tone and, you know, of how the conversation is shifting, but also how fast are people getting back to you, how much information are they giving you, and that can also reveal how much they want you and how, you know, they're actually gonna, you know what, I'll call her today and I'll get an answer for you by 4 o'clock, you know, like then that really tells you that even if you ask for something that it turns out they can't give you, they will hope that you'll still, okay, what other way can we make this work? Maybe we can't make it in this dollar amount, but we can throw in this and we still want you to come here. Like, that's still important, and that still is relationship building. And if you get the idea that this dean or this department chair is fighting for you, I think that reveals something very good and very positive. Even if you don't end up getting what you want, the fact that this person actually was like, let me go find out, that's, you know, positive too.
Yeah, and that's true about the timeline, because I think we got our first offer letter. We negotiated back and forth over the course of probably less than a week, and then I signed less than a week later. So all of that happens, yeah, pretty rapidly. I mean, once you make up your mind, and you know, and once we made up our minds, then that was the offer letter that we decided to negotiate. And so, yeah, that all happens very quickly. And like you said, they do come back to you. You know, they're very much on top of this, and they want to get the ball rolling.
They want a successful search. I think that that's the thing, is this, they're just like you are going to be working with these people. These are your colleagues. They want a successful search. They clearly thought that you're the person to fit in there, to bring something new, but also contribute to the team. They want you there. And they want their search to be successful, and they want that sucker over, you know. And so that, you know, nobody wants an unsuccessful search, because getting that approved again can be a lot of work. And so, you know, that's something to think about, is they need this to be a good fit, and they need the search to be successful as much as you need your search to be successful, and you need it to be a good fit. So I think all of that kind of comes together, and hopefully in a good way.
So much wisdom. So there's a few questions that are being pretty popular here. Let's see. So what were some of the questions that you asked while negotiating?
I definitely asked, because of the state that I'm going into. I knew that they had a certain line of internal funding for the state of Texas. Also, just some of the funding that, you know, from my visit, you know, they'd gotten certain monies that their students, their undergraduate researchers, were available, you know, to apply for, you know, their salary, their summer research projects, their year-long projects, and maybe travel funding, because all of those costs, the personnel costs, luckily, my consumables and my equipment costs are fairly low for what I do, but as you guys know too, it's personnel costs, it's getting people to go to meetings, it's, you know, God forbid you have an international meeting that year, but you know, it's all of that kind of stuff that's the huge ticket item. And so I was asking the questions about, okay, well, if I can keep these costs low, what are the various pots of student support? Because then I can aim my resources towards other things. And so I asked a lot of questions about various endowments and NSF supports, and, you know, various kind of small things like how to support my people, because I wanted them to have all those things, but I know how much those things cost and how much they eat up every level of a budget. So I asked a lot about that, and also a lot about my own professional development funds that would be, what pots of money were available in that way. So, all of that kind of stuff, and maybe not money so far as opportunities. A lot of universities have internal trainings. We have a Center for Teaching Excellence. What's their training schedule? How's the IT department? They do a lot of computational work. What's their training schedule? All of that was going to be gratis. I wasn't going to have to pay a different department to then do the training. Like, all of that was considered part of the deal, and that's a huge savings. So all of that kind of stuff, I got into quite a bit of minutia in that way of trying to support, because I think for me and my stuff, that's the huge chunk of my budget.
For me, it was asking about making things automatic and that were time savings. So Richmond has a fund where faculty can apply for small internal grants. So the money's already there, and they're going to give it. They want to support the junior faculty to help them be successful in meeting the scholarship goals for tenure. I was advised by somebody who had gone the year before to ask to have those included as part of the letter so that I didn't actually have to write for them. So then...
That's genius, man.
The money was already there, and they weren't spending more. They were going to spend it anyway, but it saved time on my end of having to put together an internal grant.
That's nice.
Darn, I should have asked for that.
All these things that come out after the fact. So I asked to have my startup extended for 5 years because I had an R00 for the first 3 years, and so I thought that maybe I wouldn't spend all of my startup in the first 3 years. Of course, it might still be spent in the first 3 years. Yeah, moving costs up to a certain extent. Summer salary, so they covered 2 months of my summer salary for the first 2 years. If they had training grants, so just like what Ray said, training grants for the students, which they did. And one of the interesting things that I didn't really think about, but was told about from other people, is to make sure that your startup funds are unrestricted. And so I guess sometimes startup funds can be earmarked for certain things, like, oh, you can only spend this money on people, you can only spend this money on renovations, you can only spend this money on travel, and only this on supplies or equipment or something like that. But if it's unrestricted, then hey, if the microscopy facility has the scope that you need, you don't have to buy one, or you can take some of that money and put it all into personnel if you want. If that's the only thing that you really want to spend that on. And so yeah, to make sure your startup is unrestricted.
So kind of related to this question of things that you can bring up during the negotiation process, and we alluded to this a little bit at the beginning, when you're negotiating and you're looking for a job and with a partner or a spouse, at what time do you bring that up, and how do you leverage that during the negotiation process? Cassie, I guess this is for you.
So it's kind of strange question for us, because so I had some interviews on my own, and my husband had some interviews on his own, and then we had joint interviews. And I think it was pretty clear after the first interviews that even if we felt we were a really good fit in some of the interviews that are our solo interviews, it was probably going to be pretty difficult for them to make 2 positions if they didn't advertise that they had more than 1 position. And again, this comes back to the fact that they have certain pots of money, and they only have enough for 1 person or 2 people. the beauty of UC Davis at the time is that they had enough people retiring and enough money that they could hire multiple people. And so there was one place that said, we would really love to hire both of you, and you would have to split a startup. And that would have been a little difficult because my husband and I work in 2 different fields, and we have 2 different requirements. And so, yeah, we can share things like PCR machines, but we can't, share a lot of other stuff. So it was kind of important for us. We ended up, thankfully, getting 2, equal but separate offers at a university, and we didn't have to negotiate. But had it come down to it, and there was only one place that would have offered us, to share the startup, we would have tried to push it as much as we could to ensure our success. But thankfully, it didn't really come to that. We did end up, negotiating for 2 different moving expenses, because I actually, because when we moved from New York to San Francisco for our postdoc, I actually had a lot of stuff that stayed on the East Coast that I needed to move over, because we moved into a tiny little apartment in San Francisco, and so we negotiated for 2 different moving expenses. I mean, remember, we're 2 separate hires. These were 2 independent hires, and so we did want to be treated as such, and we were able to negotiate that stance.
That is great. It sounds like overall you had a great experience. So for some people that are thinking ahead, maybe they are graduate students who are wrapping up their PhD, and they're looking for postdocs. They're looking ahead, but negotiating for a faculty position is not in their immediate future. But some people are wondering if the strategies that you're talking about can apply to a postdoc. So, all of you did postdocs. Did you use some of the negotiation strategies when you were negotiating your postdoc position? So, is negotiating for a postdoc maybe can be like a trial for what's coming next?
There wasn't a lot of negotiating in my postdoc, because it was like, no, this is the NSF postdoc we have. This is the salary you're going to get. This is the project you're working on. There wasn't a lot of room in that way. That wasn't my experience, but it was kind of, no, this is the ad. This is what you signed up for. So
there wasn't a lot for me either, because I went into a structured postdoc program, so they had sort of everything listed out. I guess there was a little bit, in the sense that because of the way my program was structured, there was some negotiating with the lab that I was ending up in, but not necessarily about these sorts of things. It was about having a sense of what the balance was going to be for the teaching component of my postdoc versus the research component of my postdoc, and what projects were going to be, not so much on things like salary or travel. Because I think, my guess is that when people have a slot available for a postdoc, there probably isn't a ton of wiggle room. In the same way, they've got a pot of money and this is what they have. So they're going to try to use it as best as they can.
Yeah, for my postdoc, there wasn't a lot of negotiation, but I did choose my postdoc lab based on what I knew I wanted. I wanted to be able to design my own project and work completely independently, and so not be put on a current project that maybe I wasn't really passionate about. I wanted to be able to bring in my own project, but that was really just choosing the lab. Obviously, some labs are going to have projects that you have to work on, and others are going to be, hey, you come in, you bring your own project, and you take it with you and you leave. And so that was just the postdoc lab that I chose, but I knew that going into it, what I wanted.
So that brings me to a related question, since it seems like when you're negotiating a postdoc, because possibly you're looking ahead to applying for faculty jobs. So what are some of the things that you can do as a postdoc, for example, to get ready for the negotiation process that will come when you apply and are offered a faculty position, you know, besides the research or their workshops or the things that you should be looking to get involved in or learn as a postdoc to prepare for that possible negotiation process?
A lot of the big funders, NIH, NSF, they'll have kind of a future faculty in some way. It'll be a future faculty or, you know, kind of a transition type, either, you know, webinar or, you know, weekend workshop thing that you can apply for and get support to go to. You know, so that's, you know, and that funding might go through a university like so-and-so at University of Minnesota is hosting future faculty weekend, like, you know, that kind of a thing. So you can certainly, you know, keep your eye out on those. Also professional societies, you know, I'm a member of American Chemical Society, tons of stuff there, you know, again, till is online content, is webinars, is at the big national meetings, of which we have 2 a year, there's workshops, sessions, you know, all of that kind of thing to get, you know, kind of, you know, in the mode. There's an entire division on professional conduct. So that gives you another, you know, good source to tap into. But, you know, there's lots of stuff out there. And it can be, which is really good, is it can be by field. I mean, there's sometimes it's real general, but sometimes, you know, for different fields you need real niche, and by different institution too, different type of institution, there can be kind of more tailored content. But I found there to be lots of good stuff like that out there.
Yeah, and I would say, in addition to sort of structured network things like your professional societies or other things like that, taking advantage of your own sort of professional network, talking to postdocs that are, you know, maybe a little bit further ahead of you who are in the process of transitioning to a tenure track position, or talking to people who have just gotten there and are in their first or second year, because it'll look pretty different in your, I guess, second or third year than it will in your first year. In your first year, you're so busy just trying to get a sense of what's going on that you don't really have time to be reflective. But second or third year, you have a better sense. And taking advantage of, you know, people who've already recently gone through it is probably helpful.
I definitely think the casual networking, I got some of the best advice and, you know, people connections, professionals, especially chemistry Twitter, and by institution, you know, PUIs versus R01s versus kind of almost in a middle zone programs, and being able just to have, you know, those types of conversations about getting the nitty-gritty about how to negotiate certain things, and, you know, P&T lines, and, you know, things that you, again, like this conversation, you're like, I should have asked for that.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, the casual kind of, you know, even at a big professional meeting, you meet someone who's at the place you're interested in, or at a place like the place you're interested in, or who just went through the process. The hallway conversations, the social hours, they can be more useful than the formal, because you're getting more one-on-one time, you know. And so, yeah, definitely tapping into that.
Yeah, and I mean, the large conferences, so American Society for Cell Biology, I mean, there's so many workshops, and you think that, you know, you would almost get drowned out in them, but you don't actually. You end up meeting a lot of people, but you're right, the follow-ups in the hallway, you know, and asking, okay, you know, what background are you coming from, and, you know, what are your challenges, what are your goals, and you begin to kind of understand what your own challenges and your own goals are just by talking to other people. But definitely networking. I mean, that's so important, I think, throughout your postdoc, you know, and people, I think, kind of misconstrue that term, and they think, oh, you know, you need to schmooze with the big shots, and I don't think that's true at all. I think that you actually just need to talk to your peers, or the peers, you know, like Omar said, who are just a couple years ahead of you. I think that's where you're going to get the most valuable information.
Awesome. So we are almost out of time. And so I wanted to ask you, what was the one thing that you wish you had known about the process that you didn't, but that you want to share with people?
I think for me it was the speed of which some of this stuff occurs. I think up to that point I'd heard, 2 weeks. About 2 weeks would be about, the line. And I got a call on Wednesday and they wanted to close by the end of Thursday. It ended up being the end of Friday. And so, actually, it was before the end of Friday. But like the speed of which certain things move, and how fast they're going to want an answer, which means you have to know more about your situation. You might not get 2 weeks. It's basically what it comes to. And you've got to be prepared for that. You might have 2 weeks, you might have 1 week, you might have 4 weeks, I don't know, but you might have 2 days. And so how ready are you when you start the process? Because things could move incredibly fast. That I did not know. I thought it would be like, there'll be plenty of, I'll get this out, then I'll be able to tell them I'll think about it for, no.
Yeah, to echo that, so for me it was also how long you can potentially delay an offer until all of the others potentially come in, and needing to figure out that timing and thinking, okay, like what can I ask for and how can I ask in increments, asking if, it would be really nice if my postdoc advisor could see this offer letter, and so you don't necessarily want to accept the very first offer that comes to you, because you may actually be getting offers subsequently from schools that may be on a slightly different timeline, or did their interviews a little late or something like that. So for me it was also timing, and trying to balance that.
I think for me it's that knowing what's happening on the other end. So the amount of time and effort and work that it takes for a department to get to an offer, having a sense of that changes how quickly you may or may not choose to respond to an offer or negotiations, because if they make an offer in good faith and you also do that, they're not going to pull the offer away because they made their first offer, you countered. They're not going to say nope, no offer.
Yeah.
They're gonna counter, or at least say no, we have to stick with the first offer. So being confident enough to make some sort of counter and make a genuine one that really fits what you think you need to be successful, not one that you think sounds like what they want to hear. I think that, I don't know that it would have changed much about what I did, maybe the first time, but not the third time. So.
Wonderful. I think that was a great way to close our conversation. I want to add a few points. So as I've been listening to your amazing advice, thank you so much for the real talk. So, as somebody who's not in academia, it sounds to me that the negotiation process, it's a research endeavor almost. You have to be really, really prepared. You need to know your value. You need to know what you need and what you want, but you also need to know what value you are bringing to your institution, to your department, to your colleagues. So, fortunately, research is something that graduate school and a postdoc really prepare you for. So you have a leg up there. So really important to be prepared, really important to listen and observe. Negotiation is an exercise in effective communication, really. So it's not just about what you say, but how you say it, and listening, paying attention to the people that you're working with, keeping those interpersonal relationships and building those interpersonal relationships. It's something that it's very important in the negotiation process. Also very important to network, to talk to people, and to remember that they want you. The institution wants you, so that's something that's really important to keep in mind. So thank you so much, Ray, Omar, and Cassie, for being part of this panel today. We'll be archiving the conversation, so it will be available on the iBiology website. It will also be available on the National Research Mentoring Network website. And so keep an eye out for that video. Also keep an eye out for resources and other content that iBiology and NRMN will put out that are relevant to not just to the topic of negotiating an academic position, but to your whole academic journey. So thank you so much again, everybody, the panelists and everybody who tuned in, and I will see you next time.